Welcome to Bounce, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of product teams, the challenges they face, and the incredible stories of resilience that emerge. I'm your co-host, Molly Cox, a product designer with a knack for navigating through the storms of creativity.
And I'm your co-host, Claire Flowers, a product manager who's seen it all. The highs, the lows, and everything in between.
Each week we'll bring you tales of product traumas, those moments that test our limits, push our boundaries, and sometimes bring us to our knees.
We're talking about career flops and follies and those pivotal moments when everything seems to fall apart.
But as we know, the harder you fall, the higher you bounce. We'll explore with our guests their toughest challenges,
The actions they took to overcome them.
and how these experiences have shaped their careers and continue to impact them today.
So join us in this journey of resilience, growth, and bouncing back stronger than ever.
Well, hey, Claire, here we are, our very first episode of Bounce. Coming in to kick off this first episode, what I really want to do is, you're a product manager, I'm a product designer. I really want to explore the dynamics between those two roles and any potential, I don't know about you, but for me, I've had experiences in the past where I've run into circumstances with product managers where we've had really definitive friction moments, okay? Emotions were high, emotions were off the charts sometimes. So I just want to have that conversation about what the dynamics are between us working with one another and how maybe we can be better at our roles and better partners and collaborators in the future. You're a product manager. You have about 10 years of background experience. You've been on the agency side, you've been on the client side, you've worked finance all the way to automotive and SaaS and all of these things in between. So I actually want to kick this off with kind of a crazy question to you. I want to understand and know from your perspective, being a product manager, what do you feel the primary role of a product designer is on a team?
Good question. I think that one of the things that I see as super important on any product team is a product designer, in my opinion, is one of the most important roles on the team. Working with super talented ones, working with senior to junior, I find that the relationship between the product designer and the PM is one of the most important relationships. So this can become a therapy session between me and you, Molly.
I'm in. I'm so in for that. I need it.
And it's so I want to just start that out saying like how valuable I think that the role of the product designer plays in any given, when you're building any given feature set or new product. And I use the word partner very intentionally because I think that our roles they're equal, they're distinct, and they should always be supporting each other. I think sometimes what happens is PMs, I'm going to admit it, we have egos. We are bred to embrace conflict, right? So we might be a little bit more comfortable with addressing conflict, where in my experience, I've noticed that designers, sometimes, not all designers, is not a blanket, description to all designers, but some of them can be a little bit more timid and shy away from conflict.
We're the art kids, Claire.
And you know what? I think it's an active thing that you're constantly working on in the workplace. But so where I see product designers really succeed is when they see themselves as a partner to the PM, and they obsess over the user problem just as much as the PM does. As a product manager, my role, I want to obsess about the user and become the expert in the space and really have a keen understanding. And I find that when a product designer matches me in that, there's just the possibilities are endless. So sometimes I think where those points of friction can come in is my big personality sometimes takes up all the room. And some designers, they have different styles. They might be a little bit more timid on a call, whereas later they'll come back and they'll express concern about any given decision that we're making. I love that. But I think that a lot of friction can come from when a product designer kind of suffers in silence, and maybe the PM is steamrolling and disagreeing and going against some of their designs or concepts that they're putting forward. So, but what I really find super refreshing working with product designers is when maybe we've said, hey, that button doesn't work, it needs to be named something else. they come back and they support, they defend their position and give some very distinct reasons why. And a lot of times it's because maybe people just don't understand maybe why you're making a design decision. So in my experience, when designers come back and provide that reasoning and are have a strong point of view, I think that just really sets a team up for success in whatever you're building, because there's a million decisions that have to be made. And I think that sometimes when designers are a little bit more hesitant to put their decision forward, the decision has to be made, and it's going to default to the PM. So I think that dynamic can be a little bit challenging.
Yeah, I agree. And especially the word steamroll. And I think there is something in the aspect that sometimes designers may be a little more timid. And I wonder if that actually is almost on the spectrum of experience, right? I feel sometimes, what is that law called? Darn it, where the less experience you have, the more confident you are, and the more experience you have, actually, the less confident you are. Is sometimes I almost see more with the senior designers a lack of defense and defending ideas, because we almost feel so steamrolled sometimes that we're not going to be listened to, right? It's that experience that has led up to that moment that makes us potentially a little more quiet, where I do sometimes find that the junior designers are much more apt to give their point of view, to defend their stance, because they haven't had that proverbial steamroll that you talk about. So I wonder if to some extent some of it is experience and time and just past circumstances. So the real question is, how do we get over that, right? As designers, because I think from my perspective, what I hear often from design teams I've been on is this idea of stepping on toes, right? You just said it yourself. You want to know everything about the user. You want to get in their head. You want to build the right thing for them. Well, so do we. So, oftentimes we see ourselves as the voice of the user, which, I don't want to say voice of customer. Somebody could debate me on whose role that is. But anyway, we want to be their voice and the ones defending them and really bringing to the table. Because ultimately, I also see the product manager is kind of that business defense. You're also taking scope and trying to protect kind of the needs of the business versus the needs of the user, even though we all should be doing that. So sometimes it almost feels, I'm going to go back to this idea of stepping on toes, that if we go too deep into wanting to know about the user, we're encroaching in your territory. How have you experienced that? Have you ever felt like a designer has stepped on your toes? And if so, why?
I think I have never felt, I think early as a PM, I did feel that way sometimes, but over time, I learned that if it was and by stepping on toes, maybe they disagreed or had a different point of view. Over time, I learned that was good, that was a good thing. And so I shrunk my toes.
Short toes.
Yeah. I tried to get shorter toes.
So what size of shoe do you wear now, Claire?
That's an undisclosed size. Yeah, but no, I think that maybe early in my career, I kind of would get hung up on that, on roles and stepping on toes. But then the more I started leaning into that and really asking myself, what's the core of the point that any team member is making, and what place is it coming from? And ultimately, in my view, the best, most strategic decision in the room wins, no matter your role, if the team all aligns. But I want to go back to one thing that you touched on, Mollie. You've been in this industry for ages.
Undisclosed age.
You've been a product designer. You're a professor at the University of Nebraska. You've worked in marketing tech. You've worked in fintech. You've worked across a lot of different industries, and led and been a mentor to a lot of designers. So what are you hearing now, or can you from designers in their roles specifically related to to PMs, and are you seeing any patterns, or what would you say your biggest product manager gripe is? Something that you see from product managers, like, they did it again.
Are you saying just one, Claire? Okay.
Let's start with one. Okay, biggest product
Okay, what
manager
one
gripe.
can I bubble up to the surface? No, it's that's a really, really tough question to answer because
There's so many.
there's A, there's so many gripes. B, there's so many different flavors and styles of product management, as odd as that sounds to hear. I've been a single designer on a team, like a company's very first designer, surrounded by a sea of product managers, right? And all of them wondering why I'm here, what I'm bringing to the table. I've also been with product managers who are from maybe smaller organizations where they act almost more as that project manager versus the product manager. But I've been with the product managers who are truly those visionaries digging in deep to solve those large problems, right? So when you ask that question, what's my biggest gripe? It's almost like, what style am I working with, right? I would say, I think a very large gripe about product managers that maybe you can dig into just a little bit is the idea that we never have time. Why do we never have time on anything? Like, can we research? Nope, there's no time for that. Sweet. Can we do a user test? Nope, no time for that. Awesome. All right, well, what about beta? Can we do some interviews? Nope. So tell me about that, Claire.
Very, very good question. I mean, we're from my perspective as a product manager, we are constantly evaluating resources and time. And so those things are finite. And so I think that when it comes to a designer wanting to do more research, wanting to do more customer interviews, sometimes a product manager kind of starts to get nervous because they're like, oh, they're responsible for this timeline to deliver the output of the team. And so also, I think sometimes product managers can think, oh, that's more interviews I have to interview. That's more time in my already chaotic week that I have to organize these interviews and lead these calls. And so I think that that's probably a root of it, is that there's a lot of administration work that goes on a PM's task list at any given day. And so depending on the organizations, I think that some organizations have incredible research departments where they take some of those things off the PM. But I think that when you hear a PM say, we don't have time for that, or, I think that you should clarify that, okay, wait, don't get it twisted. I'm not putting more tasks on your plate. I'm going to go and do this. Because I need to know it. And I think that if it's framed that way, if design feels very compelled to take that on as a PM, if a product designer came to me and was like, okay, you say we have no more time. Well, I'm gonna spend 3 days. Give me 3 days. I'm gonna go run all these interviews. I'm gonna do all these tests, and we can still make it in this timeline. That's chef's kiss. That's amazing. But I think that the stressors of a product manager's role is really going back to those, like, we have to default to resources and time, unfortunately. And so I think anything that the product designer can do to advocate for the need, and honestly flip it back on them and say, I really don't feel convicted in this solution that we have. I'm going to go get these answers. And then I don't know how a product manager could argue with that, but I do know that it's a problem.
Some do. No, I think you bring something that we just talked about earlier, is just this idea of a strong POV, right? Here's why. I think oftentimes, from my perspective, I feel like product managers have this idea that, let's dig into the research portion, like we're talking about. Product managers almost have this idea that it's going to be this 3-week long process, right? Where at the end of the day, we can do some great research in the matter of an afternoon, right? But what we're not doing is providing clarity. I think sometimes maybe as a designer, we get a little defensive and say, okay, great, well, there's no time, so we'll just move on to the next. And then ultimately we just stop asking, right? So sometimes it almost feels like we settle in to this idea that, like, we're steamrolled. There's no other way around it. If I ask for this, we're not going to get it. Because I think we just don't sometimes have the clarity on all the things that you are managing and what's on your plate and the expectations that you're feeling.
Absolutely. And I think that part of a product, saying manager to a product manager is like a dirty word. But the reality is that as a product manager, you have to know how to manage projects, right? So you're not, and there's a distinction. You're responsible for the timelines and the deliverables and the clarity of the problem for the team, so that they know what the constraints are and what our timelines are, right? I think that there is an element of that could be incorporated into a product designer's flow, where the PM puts up a project timeline, and then if I were a product manager, a product designer, I would think, okay, where's my stuff fit in this, and then challenge the timeline and say, hey, I really need to have this time for research, and then the product manager could come back and say, all right, well, you got 2 days. Well, then that at least gives you a yes, but it's constrained. And so I think having really transparent conversations at the start of a project about timeline, and as a product designer, you should ask a PM for a timeline for clarity, so that you don't get caught on the back end and then there's no time for research. So I think, ask for the project timeline from product managers, and wiggle your way in there.
Wiggle in. Just
wiggle in. Yeah.
I actually want to go back just a little bit to a little bit ago. I said there's different flavors of product managers, right? So you can have product managers in small orgs, large orgs, region can also matter, industry can matter, all these different types of things. I want to get a little raw with you, Claire. I want to tell you a story that happened to me in the past, and get your perspective from it. But several years ago, I walked into an organization that had never had a designer before, and I know that many designers face this, right? Especially right now, there's a lot of things in the industry and the market, and companies are scaling back in design, but there's simply a lot of organizations that still have yet to have that role in their organization. Okay. So I was brought in to a company as the first designer, and literally no knowledge of what design was around the organization. And I would say effectively the product managers were almost functioning as product owners to some extent, like really just grooming that backlog, being those, being almost more those project managers. So in a world of features and features and features, I had to try to help everybody take a step back and say, well, what about wireframes? What about sketches? What does the user say? And these were all extremely new concepts, right? The team was moving very, very quickly. Now, I was actually, I had just started and then found out I was pregnant. Okay. I was weeks in, pregnant with my twins. So I do have to preface this conversation by saying my hormones were all over the place. Okay. Like it was really difficult
Hormones
to keep
for three.
Oh my gosh. I had raging three person hormones going on. And nobody knew at this time. Right. So I am just Molly sitting in this meeting, and here I am pregnant with twins, and nobody even knows, that this is happening. So anyway, we're having this conversation. And it was kind of the PMs and the QAs, and I was really trying to. We were trying to get. It was a 0 to 1, trying to figure out kind of this new product. And I had made the suggestion that, hey, we really need to take a step back. We need to start looking at some discovery and start talking to some of the users, so that way we can start sketching and doing some wireframes. The room goes silent. Someone looks at me, throws their papers down, screams at me, screams explicit, like F words at me, saying, would you speak effing English? We don't know what you're saying. We have a way of working, and this is not it, right? And so in a world where you have to prove value a million times over, I say this situation, and okay, so I'm pregnant with twins. Keep in mind, I felt the tears, and I'm not a crier, but I felt those tears like welling up. And then I'm an angry crier too. The angrier I get, I'll cry more, right? I don't know if you feel like that. So I had to hold it in as much as I could, and just kind of let it go. And There was a couple storm out of the rooms. There was a big thing that happened. But that was really kind of a foundation for do we keep a designer or do we not? Like it was a pivotal moment. I spent probably every day for a year wondering when I was going to be fired because the company just wasn't understanding design. So I'm telling you this story because from a product manager standpoint, like when when we're using language and when we're saying things, like what expectation do you have of designers to, you say, be more clear, give a point of view? Well, how can we provide clarity in those moments? We honestly don't know what you do or do not know, right? And so outside of being a sole designer, I think language and the terms we use and things along those lines can get in our way. So aside from that being like a horrible moment in my life, I think there was maybe I wasn't listening well enough. I'm not sure. What's your take?
Wow. Well, first of all, I'm very sorry that you had that experience. I would have ugly cried too.
Yeah. Try being pregnant and going through it. Right.
My goodness. When you were telling me that story, something popped into my mind, and I think that especially for designers, you work so much in visuals. So I would say in that instance, instead of telling them, show them. So if we need to do wireframes, we need to do research immediately in someone in a product manager's mind, they're thinking, how much time is that going to take? We're already supposed to ship in 3 weeks. We have these user stories already written. So that's where, and bad or good, maybe they shouldn't, but I think that starting out with the expectation of how long it's going to take, and also coming ready with some examples. Here's what I mean by wireframes, and here is why I need to go through that. I need to do this so that we can feel confident in the outcome. We're lacking user insights. We can go run some usability studies very quickly in this tool that we have. I need a week, I need 3 days, and I'm going to come back to you guys, and we're going to start with sketches, we're going to start with flows, and then at the end of it, we can all just make sure that we're convicted. So I guess that's a long way of saying, if you're in an organization and people don't understand some of these concepts, UX research is a growing field, and it's extremely important, but people just don't know. So instead of throwing out terms or things that people aren't familiar with, and before you do that, don't just tell them, show them maybe some examples. I think that can go a long way.
Yeah, I think we just make assumptions sometimes that people know what we're talking about, right? Because we're so deep in the world, and same for any role out there, actually. We just get so deep in the things we do on a daily basis and make the assumptions that people know what we're talking about, but sometimes they don't. Have you ever had, that was a very stressful friction moment for me. Have you in the past had any friction moments or stressors with any designers that you've been working with, and what happened in that situation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it comes back to the misalignment on the timeline, the resource constraints. And again, I take responsibility on that as a PM of maybe not communicating that correctly, but in certain instances. But I've had experiences not so much in my current role, but in the past where I feel like I've communicated timelines. Everybody's aware of when these deliverables need to be passed off. But then in certain examples, the product designer doesn't seem to have like the sense of urgency that the team is working in, and maybe is a little bit slow to respond or slow to provide some deliverables. So that can be frustrating when there's a misalignment or misunderstanding of the timeline that we're trying to get something prepped for. Because as a PM, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we're so far behind. We've got to make progress, and maybe the product designer still needs some time and some space to explore with users some more. But if that's not being communicated to the PM, it just seems like the product designer is not making steps forward. So I think that's been a key point of friction in the past. And I have a hot take, and I'm interested to hear
what is that hot take?
Your opinion on this. and this is a nitpick probably, but one of my pet peeves is when designs are handed over to engineering and there's lorem ipsum in the copy. The copy's not totally finished. So
Oh,
let me ask you, Mollie. So again, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. In the absence of an opinion or someone being willing to make the decision, it always falls on the PM. So in your view, who's responsible for writing the copy?
content designers.
What if there's no content designer?
I knew you were going to say that to me. So that is actually a really difficult question, Claire. And I think the teams need to have the conversation, because I see so many not. And ultimately, if there's no, I mean, wow, you opened a can of worms for me. We can talk about style guides. We can talk about guidelines for word usage, all the different things. But I think ultimately the struggle is, product designers, I'm not a writer. Many have the skills of writing, but ultimately, in my view, we are that we go from discovery, really dig in, do that research side of things, all the way to designing, laying out. But I'm not a wordsmith, man. Like I'm not like I don't write, right? So I even look at teams that I've worked with. I have half the team using ChatGPT. I have half the team like maybe they are great at writing. But then, so if we do put words in, I've seen this happen numerous times over. A product manager, dun dun dun, will read the copy and then say, yeah, well, I think it should be this. And it's like, well, from what standpoint? Like, what makes what you think any stronger than what I think? So I've actually seen struggles happen over copy, because it's like, well, I don't know. I mean, Claire, you're not a wordsmith either. You're not a writer, right? And I'm not a writer. So who's right and who's wrong? So I think the team just needs to make that decision of who owns it. But I think a lot of times as designers, I don't necessarily feel comfortable writing the copy. That's not what, in my opinion, I'm here to do. But it also depends on the maturity of an organization, right? So if you have an extremely mature design team, chances are you're going to have content design. But if you don't have that content designer and you have less maturity in your organization, then again, just coming to the table, I think alignment doesn't happen often enough. And that alignment between the product manager and the product designer, really sitting down and saying, let's go through this almost like a retro, right? Let's go through this and determine, what are you responsible for and what am I responsible for? Let's think about this whole product development process that we go through with one another. Okay, we have discovery. We like, there's the definition, there's the discovery. Then we get into the research portion. Then we have to get into building and vetting and things along those lines. It would behoove everyone to sit down and have those conversations. So that was very long-winded, Claire. I could go on and on and on about copy for a long time.
You know what I took from that, Mollie?
What?
It ain't me.
It ain't me. Not my problem. Like, yeah, you're 1,000% correct.
No, I think that you're right though. In that these are things that need to be established up front when you're working with a new team. Maybe you're not familiar with someone else's style. I think that all team members should come to at the beginning of the kickoff of a project and really start understanding each other and understand what each person brings to the role or is going to bring to the project. And when it comes to copy, I think that I have a different opinion. I think it's the designer.
What? Oh my God. Okay. So, okay. To be fair, I didn't give an opinion. I didn't say whether it is or is not the designer. All I say is I get pretty pissy when I do copy and then you tell me it's wrong with no basis. That's where I get upset.
That's fair. That's very fair. In that situation, what I would say, and this is my style. If I've never, I hope, I try not to say the copy's wrong. I try to say, if I disagree with the copy, I try to say, okay, well, what I'm getting from that is this. Is there another way that we could rework that? And if the designer thinks, no, I think this is good, then I'm going to say, okay, then we're good. Let's move on. Anyways,
that's you, Claire.
That's two of the weeds.
Yeah, sometimes that. But I actually think it brings up a really great point that I often see missing. And this isn't necessarily a dynamic problem between a product manager and a product designer. But oftentimes I see this missing from the conversation is the experimentation mindset, right? So ultimately, who's responsible for copy? I don't know. Is it the product manager? Is it the product designer? But we should also have this idea that whatever we create is not definitive when it comes to copy. We know that with flows. We know we can test different interactions, we can test flows, but the same mentality should be true for mindsets. I know even Airbnb has this whole story about their $1 million button, right? And they weren't getting conversion on this certain button. They decided to just tweak the copy on it, and it ended up providing tons of money in conversion, right? And it was just a copy change. And so to the point that you're saying, we need to put so much more attention to copy, but also have the mindset that we can iterate, experiment, and test on it.
And maybe my takeaway is that nobody truly owns the copy. It's a team-owned thing.
Unless you have a content designer.
Okay. And then it's on them.
And then it's them, okay? Like, give them the credit where credit is due. Right?
Okay, well, let me ask you this, Mollie. Yeah. So I gave you my point of view on where I think the product designer falls, their responsibilities. I'd love to hear your point of view on where you think the primary responsibilities are from a product manager, and where you see them kind of creeping over into your territory a little bit. Maybe your toes are getting stepped on.
Yeah. So I really look, the best relationships I've had with product managers in the past are obviously the extremely collaborative ones, where it's like, I trust that you guys are there to solve the problem. You see the business, you understand the market, you're looking at the different areas, like whether it's enterprise, SMB, and you're saying, we need to solve this challenge. Here's what I know. You're bringing that to the table. So how I love and what I've seen work the best is when you come and say, we're solving this problem. Here are some ideas that I think can help solve it. Let's flesh them out together and let's keep working through that. Because oftentimes I feel like product managers forget we're great ideators as well. And we can help you kind of strengthen some of those ideas that you may have. So from my perspective, where I really feel like this is the worst, and this is what I see happen a lot, is in those relationships, because I've even seen it at large companies. The product manager comes to me when they're ready for wireframes. Right. So all the discovery's been done. And then I say, well, have we talked to users yet? Oh yeah, here's some gong calls, right? Okay, great. But I wasn't able to ask any of the questions that I want to ask. Oftentimes I've seen, so here's a gripe, Claire, we'll go back to gripes, right? When the product manager comes and says, hey, I need some wireframes by tomorrow. Wait, what? Like, what are you talking about? Like, we are not here just to provide designs. We are here to be strategic partners, to give that point of view, to help do those interviews, to help find the right solution to the problem that you're facing. You should be able to feel like you can delegate to us. We should be able to run interviews. We should be able to do those different things. And then ultimately together decide, okay, if this is what we're solving, what are some of those big features we're looking at? And then let's wireframe from there. Right.
So the PM is jumping steps, and maybe that comes from the PM not understanding what the steps need to be, which I think goes back to some of the alignment pieces.
Or even worse, when the PM says, "Here's some wireframes," like. Now, everybody has fair game to sketch, right? Like, I would love to see, but I have worked with many product managers who say, here is the solution. Like, I think that is one thing from a design standpoint is I want the solution to be ambiguous. I want to figure out how to solve your problem through a flow and through designs. But when someone comes to me and says, here's what I have, and then it's really hard to get out of your mindset that that's already the solution, right?
Because you've already been biased, and it could have gone a totally different way, but you've been biased by this wireframe that already is making a ton of assumptions that you haven't been able to come up to speed on.
Right. No, I've spent several years trying to work this out in my mind. I think there's something we all have to remember, which is positive intent, right? I don't think anyone necessarily, any product manager I've worked in the past doesn't come to me with wireframes with negative intent, right? You're genuinely trying to work it out and sketch and solve it. But again, it's that bias. How do we create a dynamic relationship where we're sketching together and we're wireframing together, right? Whether it's in like a quick working session or anything along those lines. And I think that's one of the things that is missing the most is those working sessions and coming together and creating a solution as opposed to here, do this thing. You have until Friday to make me wireframes. And it's like, I don't even know the problem we're trying to solve, right?
I think I have been guilty of doing wireframes, but it was for my own educational
Clear. I
purposes.
knew it. I know. Oh, was it? Was it? So there was no bias in there at all after you created.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
Well, do you have any other gripes that you'd like? This is a therapy session, Molly. I'm here for it. I want the feedback. I want to know how I can be a better PM to a designer.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously we can be better product designers for a product manager, but I mean, when I think about gripes, I really come back to also, so it's making the assumption that I have knowledge on certain things, right? It's making the assumption that I've been caught up to speed. Do you know how many times I've been caught in a scenario where it is like, we need this or we need to iterate this, and it's like, I have zero input or ideas on what you're even talking about at this point. So again, early alignment is so key, and I think that's where we think we step on product. Let me talk about stepping on product managers' toes. I hear this all the time, right? Because we're worried that if we go too far in discovery, we're stepping on your toes. So sometimes we're too quiet and we don't input our opinion because we're worried about that as well. I'm just trying to think like of other gripes that come to my mind from, also, this is what's hard in that is there's this whole idea and philosophy right now of the different styles of product management, which we just talked about. But really, there's those product managers who are those big problem solvers, but there's the ones that come from the project management standpoint. And I feel like oftentimes when I have the most friction with a product manager, it's when they're more a project manager and are worried too much about the timeline. And they come up with all the solutions and just hand it to us. That is what we don't want, solutions handed to us.
I will say that I was, before I got more into a focused product manager role, I was more heavily on the project management side, and I hated it.
Yeah.
That's why that's what I shifted to the product manager role, is because I really didn't like, I love project managers. They're amazing. They're super organized. They keep things on track. It wasn't for me. But so sometimes when I think that sometimes there can be an expectation from designers or even engineers or even other people on product teams that the product manager is supposed to be the project manager. They're supposed to be managing the entirety of the tasks.
Well, if you don't do it, who's gonna, Claire? I mean,
we're not project managers,
aren't you? I don't.
Oh no. Yeah. Well, and I think back to you mentioned, worried about doing too much discovery. In my view, nobody owns discovery. I think that they should be happening in tandem. I think everybody, engineers, product marketers, product designers, I think everyone should feel emboldened to do their own discovery, to challenge. If I'm putting up a point of view or making a business case for something, I want people challenging me, because the more heads in the room, the better, and the best strategic idea or opportunity wins, no matter who it comes from, in my opinion.
Claire, I came up with another gripe. Do you want to hear it?
Was it out of something I just said?
No, actually, my brain was going back to solutions. You know what I've had it with? Tell me. Pre-solution Jira tickets. Yes. So here's Jira tickets that I get. So I mean, there's sometimes engineers are writing tickets, but sometimes product managers are writing tickets. It is one way. But when I get a Jira ticket that says create a modal for XYZ or something along that line, you realize you're giving me the solution, right? My question is a modal even what we should be designing? But when you write the ticket as though we need a modal here or we need XYZ here, you're already, whether there's a wireframe or not, you've created the solution in the language of your Jira ticket.
Let me ask you this. So even though words matter. I will emphasize that. But to touch on something, do you feel if just because the ticket was written and it said modal that you can't say, nah, we're not doing a modal, we should do this? Like you're triggered by the words there. I can tell.
Did I seem triggered? Well, but Claire, I think it goes back to the conversation we had at the very beginning of this is that idea of pushing back or not being steamrolled. Like you do it so many times and it's like, okay, well, I just don't want to deal with this. Like on it, like it's I've dealt with this so many times. It says modal, I'll design a modal because I don't have the energy today. Right. Which is not a good thing, but it's how often do we have to do that? So, I mean, a better way of structuring instead of saying we need a modal here, because again, it brings that bias up that you already said. What if I bring something that's not a modal? You're going to be like, well, the story said a modal.
I wouldn't.
Oh, well, that's you, Claire. How many other product managers have you seen would maybe take that take?
You know, I can't speak for other product managers. I am a huge fan of me saying modal and you saying no, not a modal. It's a this. It's always a better idea, and I'm like, oh, that's a basic, much better idea. So maybe I think what I'm learning is in these, you know, when you're for PMs, be conscious of the prescriptions that you're giving to designers, and designers can often feel like they were an afterthought being invited to the party, and that doesn't feel good.
No, I think that's you just very much nailed, I think, the crux of all of it is being an afterthought, right? So there's this, I sent you a meme, the amazing Mad Men, Don Draper, and the art, art director. Yeah. And it's a picture of him that says, I'm at war with you. And it says designer. And then Don Draper is the product manager that says, I don't even think about you. And I feel like that's what we feel like all the time is you don't even think about us. Right. And that
it hurts my heart, but I do think that it's true for some people. I'm so sorry.
It's like we care so hard and we're doing all these things. And then you're like, what? Oh, the designer. I forgot about you.
I don't even think about you.
I don't even think about you. So I think that's the crux of the issue is oftentimes it's just this idea that we've been left out of critical moments in the process. And we're here just to the awful phrase of to make things pretty, right? And we're here to provide designs to your solutions. I think that's where a lot of dynamics go sour.
Well, I've learned a lot from this therapy session, and I vow to be a better partner to the product design.
Tell me how you're going to be a better partner. Like your takeaways from this, what are the things that you absolutely A, wish designers knew you're thinking, and B, how are you going to change yourself, Claire? How are you going to be better?
on the spot. I think just being super, again, keeping that mindset of the designer being your critical partner in everything that you're building and keep thinking about them, keep considering them, and also making sure that not only are you obsessing about the problem that you're trying to solve, but also making sure that you're getting alignment on timelines, on resources needed from every single team member. So if that's design, if that's engineering, and having those conversations extremely early. I think once you get into a project and you skip those steps, the timelines have already been put out there, the goals have already been written, and it's often too late. So I think that a big lesson here that I've learned is to really get in those project kickoff meetings, making sure that everybody is aligned on the timeline and everybody's able to submit their own and draft their own deliverables and fit them into those timelines so that it works for everybody before the timeline is ever sent to anyone else. So I think sometimes that we can skip that step. So that's one of my main takeaways. Also that product designers own copy. So
I never said that. No, anyway, I never said that.
Oh, sorry. I'm pretty sure I heard you say that.
I think a couple of takeaways for me is I think we always have to ultimately, we have to remember positive intent. I know that that's pretty broad and general to the conversation that we're having, but I think if we can keep that in purview, that like you're not coming to me with just pre-solutioned. You're genuinely, here's some of my ideas, make them better. But sometimes even if you don't say that, that's kind of the idea behind bringing us some of those things, right? So I think ultimately in the relationship is always remember positive intent. And I think go back and before you kick off a project, when you start working on either, a massive new feature or even a little feature, create an alignment. What am I responsible for? What are you responsible for? How are we going to work together? Great. I need to do research, X, Y, Z, Y. Here's the timeline. Here's what I will do to make sure it happens, right? So being very forward about the responsibilities I will take versus what I need you to take and what works and what doesn't. Is that fair?
That is totally fair. I will say I worked with one designer who started, I'd never seen this before, and it was the most incredible thing ever. They, in a project kickoff, they came to me with their own timeline. And they were like, here's what I'm understanding the timeline is, and here's how I see all the things that need to happen with design. I was speechless. I was like, this is incredible. Yes. I mean, we had to give and take a little bit, but yeah, I think that the timeline, unfortunately, it is what it is. And so everybody being aligned on that and advocating for what you need and how it fits in there is important.
Yep. I think no matter how, the struggle is the speed in which we work so often. And I think that no matter how quickly we're working, we always have to take a step. I mean, we do retros for a reason, right? I used to, in one-on-ones, I used to retro one-on-ones every quarter and be like, hey, how do we make our communication better? How do we talk? What am I not providing to you that you need? Sometimes it's hard to say those things face to face to another individual, like, well, you're not giving me this, Claire. But there's something so agnostic about a retro board being in front of you and just being able to throw some sticky notes on there and then have a discussion about it. It's such a natural thing in the product world. I would even recommend retroing, at the, not like a postmortem, but how do we make our relationship stronger? How do we communicate better? What can I provide you that I'm not giving you? And vice versa, I think is always a strong thing to do to A, kick off with the alignment, but B, check in on the communication, check in on how you're working with one another and adjust.
Be flexible. And that it really is at the end of the day, a partnership and a relationship that you have to invest in and nurture and constantly be aware of the other person's, how your actions impact that person and how that person impacts you. So great therapy session. This is amazing.
Thank you. I appreciate you so much. On those lines, I'm so excited to really dig in to some of the episodes that we have upcoming. We're going to have product managers, more product managers, product leaders, product ops, product marketing. We're going to get into it with so many different folks and just really hear about all the different spectrums across product teams and those friction points and those stressors that we face. So I, for one, am pretty darn stoked, Claire.
I'm honestly here for all the gripes. I'm here to talk about the gripes. I'm here to unpack them, and I just can't wait to see everything we uncover.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate this kickoff episode, and I look forward to all the ones that we have in the future.
Yes, thanks so much, Molly. Can't wait.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe and leave a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you'd like to connect with us, check out our website at bouncepodcast.com.